CFPs. Did open this up. I will say, just for update on my thing, I am planning to submit something. I've started working on notes for what specifically it'll look like based on the guidance that they've put out for kind of what they're looking for with the CFP. So it's just in the notes stage right now, but the deadline is 4/25. So got exactly a month, actually. Today's the 25th. So exactly a month until the CFP deadline.
That is great news.
Yeah, and then I haven't seen anything. Excuse me. I haven't seen anything about dates for these three. I think we were expecting KubeCon that we would hear something soon. Do we know if NA has been?
I think KubeCon.
Oh yeah, submit to speak.
It's likely very, very close. Yeah.
June 9th.
Oh, that's actually much more time than I expected us to have. Often it's very, very close. And there have been a couple of occasions where the CFP deadline was during the KubeCon Europe, which led to a tremendous amount of whining.
Okay.
So
yeah, so we have this one open then, and then the OWASP item here. Oh, that's a fun sculpture. Let's see.
Wow, they really upgraded that hotel with that sculpture.
They truly did.
That's been there for a while.
Oh, okay. Maybe I haven't been in that hotel for a while.
There are a couple of Hyatts in San Francisco. You might be thinking of the other Hyatt that's also near downtown.
Oh no, this is the one on the Embarcadero.
Yep, down by the water. Yeah.
Yep.
That hotel is featured in Mel Brooks's High Anxiety.
Yeah, it's an interesting space.
It's weird because like I have memories of that hotel that go back so far that it's just like, okay, they could have put that in at any point. So
yeah, okay. And it's also coming back to me. The reason I would hang out at that hotel is my ex's office used to be near that hotel, but she left the law firm where her office was in 2005. So
the years roll.
Yeah. So sometime in the past 20 years, they upgraded it. Yes, that checks.
Nice. Okay, so one thing I've just updated here is just that they've said when the CFP will open, but we don't know when the CFP will close.
And my apologies. I was supposed to follow up on them. I sent them an email, and my email bounced back, and then I just let it go. But I'll make a note of that to see when to send them a message and see when that'll close.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it seems like, I mean, if it's opening on the 20th, I guess my only thought really is just kind of like how, that's a little bit of time until it opens, but then kind of how long will it be open? Yeah.
Yeah, they may have had a problem with either my Proton Mail email address or something, because it bounced back and it said, I can't remember what the message was, but it was like, we're not accepting email from you.
Yeah, email has gotten to be much more of an exclusive club in the last 20 years.
Yeah. A lot of just, kind of like, hey, I don't trust that domain or that host, something's fishy about this, I'm just going to reject, which like in the world of, spam being a thing, like I get, but does get kind of frustrating that I think it tends to centralize people toward, one of the major email hosts.
Yeah, I also live on a Proton Mail a VPN, so I almost always on some redirected VPN, and I don't even know why I do that, but that may have something to do with it also.
Right. Okay, so nothing updated for either of these. And these aren't like, actually, these conferences aren't even announced for this year. I'm just sort of, optimistically hoping that they will happen, because I think if they do, they're relevant. So
You're suggesting the reproducible build summit is reproducible?
That would be ideal, right? Okay, so I think that's it for CFPs unless someone has a conference to add. All right. Build tool, community outreach stuff. Is there anything new to say here?
The only thing that I'll add is I've got to ping the Docker people. Started a conversation a week and a half ago. It seems to have not gone anywhere. Will ping.
Okay.
In fairness, I think a lot of the old school Docker people were probably in Paris last week. So
Okay. What was in Paris?
KubeCon EU, and I seem to recall
Trying to organize.
that with
I'm
this
trying to-
calendar, they tried quite a few things.
Okay. I'll do some pestering later this week then.
For the SBOMIT, I'm trying to organize a booth talk at in the RSA conference in May. So can't give details just yet, but we'll let you know if it ends up working out.
Nice.
And then for the Go stuff, we just need to sort of figure out the beginning here of how we're gonna contribute to Golang and set up I guess some form of group with Golang. And when there's an agreement or whatever contribution agreement that we need to sign. So really for me, the biggest question to start is whether we want to create the contribution group as Cisco or as OmniBOR as like a separate group. And yeah, get those.
Yeah, I apologize. I was also out last week, so you reached out. I need to go take a look. My guess is that even independent of whether or not we would or would not want to do something as this group, and we're not strictly legal entity, so it's tricky. I think you're probably gonna have to jump through some Cisco hoops anyway, just to dot your I's and cross your T's. So
Okay.
It strikes me that it would be useful to have two things going into a conversation with the compiler teams. The first one of which is, example code, and the second one of which is a validation suite, so that we can make sure that each, as we're going towards finalizing the spec with all of the pieces parts, something that actually validates that each of the compiler enhancements is doing stuff spec worthy.
Got it. So I guess that's another question of how we want to do this contribution. So it's like, do we prepare a bunch of stuff in a repo somewhere and have it ready for those, like you said, those two things, and then before going to talk to them, or do we talk to them and see what they think first to decide what we kind of do from there? So this is brand new to me, so taking all feedback.
I mean, I think that independent of anything, we do need a validation suite, and that means we got to finalize the spec. And then, I think you're right. We take the temperature of each community and approach the community based on kind of how they roll. And my guess is going to the Rust community with something running. At least my vibe off the Rust community is that that's generally, kind of more
desirable,
well received. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
the
like,
vibe is kind
okay.
of like build your own thing, like work independently of like trying to build stuff directly into the compiler at first and kind of validate it, and then eventually stuff can move in. And like that path has happened before for other tools in the space.
Yeah, but I don't know how the Go community rolls. I mean, watching like some of the stuff around generics. God.
Yeah. I was just gonna say I can see what the precedent. I can try and investigate what the precedent has been From their contribution guidelines, it feels a little bit more like, tell us what you're thinking, and then we'll figure out how to make it work, sort of deal.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Does Go have a like an RFC kind of like propose improvements to the language kind of process? I know that so like Rust has this. I know there are other languages that kind of do this. Python has PEPs. Does Go have something like that?
To me, it from the contribution guidelines, at least, it really felt like it's just like create issues to talk to them through the issues. I didn't see
Yeah.
anything like a formal process being like, hey, create me this document that explains your thing and we can try and
Yeah.
get it in.
That makes sense. I've gotten, and this like as an outsider, it seems like in general, Go is more sort of centrally managed by like you have like the Go, sort of core team, and obviously it's sort of folks at Google, and that they, it seems like exercise more kind of authorial, like central authorial control versus languages like Rust or Python, where when Python, I really mean Python today, like sort of post BDFL, where yeah, it is more of like a community consensus kind of thing. And this is not
Yep.
to say one way or the other is better. It's just more like a description.
Yep. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I actually have been in some talks recently with possibly working with people that are working on crypto and Go, and
Cool.
it seems like they kind of take the approach you're talking about. There's like a head of the Go team, and he kind of picks and chooses probably along with the team itself, but they hold it seems like a lot of authority
Yeah.
in what goes in.
Cool. All right. One thing I added here, and this is just like a small update for the Rust stuff that I remembered while we were talking, is had a more concrete discussion with Ashley from Axo about integrating some of the OmniBOR Rust stuff into Cargo Dist, which is their tool for basically generating mechanisms for like pre-building Rust binaries that you're going to distribute. Really useful tool. We actually use it for the OmniBOR CLI. So the initial idea basically would just be producing the artifact IDs for stuff that you're distributing with Cargo Dist. Since OmniBOR RS doesn't implement the manifest portion yet, that's like in progress. So it won't implement that initially, the Cargo Dist integration, but the goal is eventually to do manifests as well. So yep, I think that's it for my update. Any other stuff?
Spark something else, Andrew. You and I might want to sit down and figure out how the corpus should evolve based on manifest generation. Because right now the corpus is basically kind of the post facto build. I know that we had a conversation about this last time. I want to make sure that as manifests are starting to be generated, we can figure out exactly the right way to get them into the corpus so that it just becomes, kind of more data, but it's also more reliable data because it's, you're capable of doing attestations around it, etc. So maybe you and I have an offline conversation about that, and then maybe bring a proposal to this group for discussion.
Sure. Yeah, that works for me.
And Ava, does that address some of the concerns that you raised last meeting?
How embarrassing. I was multitasking. I'm so sorry.
No problem. My proposal is that Andrew and I go away and put together a proposal for the post facto generation of Gitoids and kind of the OmniBOR corpus, and then how things start to look once we have things generated as part of the Rust tool, kind of build chain through the Axo dev stuff, and bring a proposal to this group to make sure that kind of as OmniBOR documents are being generated by the build tools, that works well with the corpus as well as the post facto generated stuff. Does that satisfy your concerns from our last meeting?
I think so. Yeah, in the hand waviness of works well with, I think that's probably good. because it's still unclear to me how we differentiate to consumers of these data structures, which ones have the properties they're seeking, which ones have only an approximation.
Okay,
Yep. I
cool. So
Yeah.
that's a great criteria, which is, you know, how, I was about to say how trustworthy are they, but I don't think that's kind of the right word. How reliable is a particular document or graph of documents? And you know, if we can have markers that designate the reliability,
Yeah.
that might help.
I like that. Just to double down on something, because it's one of my sort of pet projects. I'm trying to reserve the word trust or trustworthiness for when we're talking about the human systems involved, and computers being a proxy often for the human act of trusting another human. So I think in this case, the malicious intent isn't the situation you're trying to address in describing the difference here. So it's not trust in that sense, but rather, does it represent accurate information versus approximate information?
Okay. Andrew, let's you and I make sure that we kind of roll approximate and accuracy into kind of what we're defining, and then bring it back to this group.
Yeah, and take care to not overload use of the term trust.
Yeah. The T word will be removed from my vocabulary except when dealing with people.
All right.
And systems that are proxies for people.
And systems that are proxies for people. And Andrew, I trust that we will be able to do this well.
Yeah, I think so.
Sorry for the hijack.
No, it's good. Okay, I think that covers it for outreach stuff. So going back to the agenda, do we have any demos? I don't this week.
The only demo that I have, I pasted into the OmniBOR Slack, which is we now have the ability to time travel through CVEs.
That is pretty cool.
Cool. Yeah. So right now, you can ask for a CVE either by its CVE number, by its GitHub. I only pulled the GitHub advisory stuff. Yeah. Proof of concept. And you can also see a time-based history. So how did the CVE evolve? The next step, and this should be the next day or two, I will also be able to support adding a query parameter that says as of a particular date, and it will be the most recent update for a particular CVE that occurred before the date in question.
Nice. This reminds me a little bit of if you've ever looked at the EPSS API, which gives it's the exploit prediction scoring system. So it gives you sort of a number for like how likely it thinks something is to be exploited. I believe you can similarly ask for kind of time travel information of like, hey, at this date, like what was the EPSS score for this thing? It's useful.
Yeah. And look, as companies are starting to, or organizations are starting to look at incidents that happened in the past, understanding what the state of the world was in the past becomes a lot more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What should we have known?
Yeah. Nice. Okay, and then questions from implementers. Anything there? Okay. Active discussion. So it seems like this one was resolved in the last meeting about pruning this document at the end of the quarter, which is rapidly approaching. Actually, yes, yeah, this is the last meeting of the quarter, actually, because next week will be the 1st of April. So cool, last meeting of this document. So I think so input manifest, and this is a part like I missed last week, so I'm catching up on what was discussed. But I believe this is tied to a thing that Ryan and I had been discussing around the embedding of the target ID for a manifest. And it sounded like, so he and I had some discussion, and the idea was that the target ID, which is basically the thing that says like what artifact the manifest is describing, that would go in the or that could go in the like file name of the manifest file, although it sounded like there was a concern basically around sort of like exactly how that, like exactly where that ends up.
There are fairly straightforward trade-offs there, right? Which is if you embed the if you embed the target ID of the thing the manifest represents in the manifest itself, then you can't embed reasonably without enormous pain the ID of the manifest in the thing that you built.
Yes. Yeah.
And so those are sort of the trade-off problems. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people who absolutely like killed themselves proving me wrong about that. Go look at some of the early signing of XML bullshit. But it turns out that goes badly for everyone involved.
Yep.
There's also a degree to which simple is better, and to what degree do we need the manifest to have, sort of include as part of its ID a kind of cryptographic attestation of the thing that it's targeting, versus having the thing include the actual artifact include a reference to its manifest. Which I think like that direction of the pointing matters a lot more.
Yeah, I mean the other thing is that there's also some thought that has to go into the non-embedding case where you're basically saying we're not embedding the pointer to the manifest into the artifact itself, which there are clear use cases where that's not going to be a thing. Then how do we capture it? How do we capture that relationship otherwise?
Yeah.
Anyway, I've said too much. Other people should talk.
So I just wanted, so with this, I originally the intent of the comment was actually about it's a struct, and it has I think if I remember right in Rust there's the display impl I forget what exactly that's called, but the interface I believe is what it's called, but you have the ability to print out all the fields that are within the struct. So essentially the question was more around, should we print out the target since that's one of the fields? But then yeah, we thought deeper about what, could we embed that, and all that led down that discussion. I do think after thinking about it some, I do think that the having the target in the file gets really complicated, even in the file name maybe could be really complicated. And so the embedding seems like a good route. It just means that the way I'm seeing it right now is that if you do embedding on some output artifact, that the downstream artifact manifests, input manifests, have to operate on the version that has the embedding already done on it, because otherwise the getoid is different.
Yeah, the idea is like you really
so,
don't want people distributing like a non-embedded version and an embedded version. It's like
exactly.
you have to pick
Don't
one.
do that. It's one or the other. It means something when you embed, right? So that, I guess that's what I'm trying to, what I noticed, I guess, with that.
Yeah. The other problem that you run into trying to put the target name into the file name is that to date we've been basically, in order to improve the speed with which you can look things up, we've been encoding the getoid of the input manifest itself as the file name, so that if I have some other manifest that I'm saying, okay, I've got this thing, this is the getoid of its input manifest, how do I go find that? It's a very straightforward thing to find.
Yep. Yeah, yep. Agreed.
All of this said, I think that there is something we do need to figure out around this for the non-embedding case. So that the non-embedding case is a straightforward, consistent way that you can basically provide a pointer from a target that is not embedding the input manifest ID to the input manifest ID, so you can map between them. I think that needs to be sorted. But as a general rule, putting the target ID has significant trade-offs if you want to put it in the input manifest itself.
Yeah. And just to bring it back to the sort of code thing that initially prompted this, the way that it's currently done in the draft implementation in Rust is that the debug impl, which is basically your debug printing, if you sort of select that the debug formatting when you're printing this tract, does include the target ID. Just, you know, it's relevant info if you're trying to debug manifest related stuff. The display impl is designed to exactly match what the spec says for like actually writing out the manifest file. And so it doesn't include the artifact ID. And the other thing it does, it also like specifically ensures that you are only using just the like \n new line character, which as like a funny note, I had to get Clippy, the Rust linter, to stop complaining at me about doing that, because it tries to correct you toward using cross-platform, you know, depending on the or I should say like platform sensitive new lines, which would sort of be more correct most of the time. But for something where we need it to be cryptographically identical, regardless of who's generating it, like we can't have that sensitivity. So that was just like a fun thing.
Yeah, got it. I think that, yeah, no, there's definitely, I didn't know that difference, or, you know, the different forms there. So yeah, that's good information. So yeah, display, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just it has like exactly how it's meant to be represented, right? So that would make sense that it wouldn't have the target in there. So yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I
That's the
figured it
idea.
was something like that, but I didn't know for sure. Cool.
Yep. Awesome. I didn't put it in here, but the other thing I figured that I wanted to discuss, and I make a little issue for it, or topic, basically is the kind of, I don't know if like, I'll say comparative analysis discussion. And this is basically discussing the stuff that I was sharing in the Slack on Friday. So going back, oh, are you all still able to see Slack right now, or did I set it to only share my browser window? I honestly don't remember.
Currently, it's only sharing your browser window.
Okay, I'm gonna just fix that and reshare with the screen. And in particular, okay, I'm gonna open up this gist. So basically, I spent some time going through the sort of the other software identity schemes that were either identified in the CISA software identity document, or from groups that had published responses to that document, because there was a request for comments to it. And then also I saw a couple of groups that I think had missed the RFC response deadline, but still they contacted CISA and basically were told, hey, you should still publish your response. And so they did. And I will say first thing, like none of this is intended as criticism of like the schemes that are represented here. They all, I think, have particular use cases that they designed their scheme to be for and to try and reflect. And so, you know, they each are sort of fitted to that use case. But I do think like doing this exercise was very useful for me for understanding and I think sort of more crisply characterizing why I think OmniBOR serves the specific use case that we care about better. And I'll basically like my characterization of that use case essentially is scalable software identity, where, and by scalable, I mean like not reliant on essentially like other parties to do things, either to have a central corpus of some sort, some taxonomy that is maintained, or requiring like the software creators to do something, or requiring some sort of packaging step. And basically with these other schemes that are reflected here, all of them except for software heritage IDs require some degree of like other people who are involved in this system doing specific things. So package URLs, right? It's like supposed to have a general scheme for referring to packages on lots of different platforms. First of all, like the artifacts that are identified are packages. It's not like arbitrary software artifacts. It's specifically the notion of a package defined based on like whatever that package host is, whether it's like, you know, a Debian package or NPM or whatever. And, you know, they wanted to unify across all these different systems, which is good and admirable, but like it requires a central authority to maintain the list of different hosts that they have created schemas for. And like I copied over the list up above. So they've got, you know, there's a bunch of stuff here, but like someone has to maintain this list to describe how for each of those package hosts, how to map that into the package URL scheme. Then you have CPE, Common Platform Enumeration, which actually I think started as a MITRE thing and then eventually got moved to NIST. But it's basically a bundle of key value pairs that are designed to either identify classes of software or to identify specific software for the purpose of saying what a vulnerability applies to. And you have the general scheme for like what a CPE is, and then you have the CPE dictionary, which is maintained by NIST. And other people could also like maintain their own, but I really think the NIST one is kind of the only game in town that I've seen. It's big and it requires a lot of work to maintain, and also still isn't actually enough for like the full scale of software because, you know, how could it be? Like there's just too much. So it's very useful and it's designed specifically to, you know, describe the applicability of vulnerabilities basically for stuff that's in the CVE system, because that's like what NIST cares about. But it requires someone to maintain that dictionary. And then SWID tags require the creator of the software to define the tags. And there are different types of tags for like different parts of the software lifecycle and different purposes. But the basic idea is like they're created by either the producer or the distributor of the software. And like they have to do that. And the IDs that are there are just, they're sort of left open. It's like they should just be unique values. I think that's pretty much the only thing that the spec says for it. Although I will admit I read sort of secondhand things for the spec because I did not want to drop $250 to ISO to read the full SWID spec. So
I'm very sympathetic. That's what ended my MP4 implementation career in 2000.
Yeah. Thankfully, I think it was the IETF or some other group has stuff that's sort of like it is not a full replication of the spec, but it is a detailed enough description of things that I was like, okay, I feel like I have, you know, good enough understanding of what's happening here. But yes, that requires someone to like define these tags, and there's not really like a scheme for doing it. It's just like there should be a unique value. So you have that. NICs and GUIX basically being just like GNU NICs have roughly the same scheme. It is the most complicated scheme. It is the first 20 bytes of a SHA-256 hash of a fingerprint, and the fingerprint construction is actually fairly complicated based on the specific details of the construction of the NICs package. Their requirement is that it be a NICs package, and that it's specifically that the build of that package needs to be deterministic, because the ID is based only on the inputs to the build. It is not based on the output at all. And so it kind of requires deterministic builds, and it like requires someone to have gone through the work to make a NICs package that fulfills that so that the identifier is useful.
Not entirely.
Okay, do I have that wrong?
You're close, and that certainly appears to be the case. However, having sat down with some of the NICs maintainers to ask about these questions, actually, it generates reproducibility by bypassing a build system when the NICs build engine identifies that a desired build step has already been performed because the hash of all the inputs matches the hash of all the inputs of a previous build iteration. It says, oh, don't do it again. Here's the artifact from last time.
Mm-hmm.
So it within a closed system, it effectively creates reproducible builds where otherwise there might not have been a reproducible build by not building again when it has been built before.
Okay, so this is a little bit of like the kind of analogous to like the distributed caching stuff with like Buck2 and Buck and like other kinds of like cloud build systems where it's like, you know, for efficiency's sake, we would avoid rebuilding things. Like if we can detect that this sort of thing has been built before, we're just going to grab the output of,
So the NICs packager, because it's storing the manifest of all the inputs of an output, if you request a build again before it executes the build, it compares the manifest of all the inputs you've listed with previous builds. Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so that is good clarification. And I'm happy to like update my analysis to reflect that. I do think though, based on what I'm hearing, that it sounds like it still kind of requires that stuff be like packaged and existing within like the NICs ecosystem, so that there's, you know, you have this prior store of the outputs, and
it does not map outside the NICs ecosystem. Now, if
Right.
the entire world used Nix, Nix would solve problems for the world.
Right. And that
Yeah.
was a little bit of, because I read they'd missed the response time for the RFC, but they then published their response to the CISA identification thing. And yeah, I think that was kind of their argument. Seemed like, if more things used Nix, then the more things would get the various benefits of Nix, which, like, that's fair. Nix seems cool and interesting. Like, I'll admit I haven't, spent much time with it. But it does kind of require the like stuff has to be Nixified, like it has to exist in the Nix ecosystem. So okay, so that's for Nix and UX. The last one, Software Heritage ID, is interesting and I think is closest to what we do. But basically what they have is essentially Gitoids plus one other type, which is Snapshot, which is basically a Gitoid that is it's a fifth type of Gitoid that basically identifies the state of all of the branches of a repository, to sort of say, like, here is our identifier for the complete state of a repository and all of the branches that we identified at a specific point in time, and to identify that. And their whole deal is like software archiving.
I'd be really curious how they're doing that, given the nature of how it actually works.
Yeah, they've got, I mean, actually, I will say, like, they have a pretty decent description of all the constructions for their different identifier types. They also at the moment are like, hey, currently for 4 of the types, we do exactly what Git does, but also we don't guarantee that will ever be the case. And like, we feel comfortable breaking Git compatibility in the future.
They also have no forward evolution for like the SHA-1 to SHA-256 transition for Git and the rest of it.
Yeah. And that is the other thing that I noted in here, is that like it's SHA-1 and it's specifically coded as like, it is SHA-1.
Yeah, I had looked quite closely at software heritage IDs, and they were just so tantalizingly close to something we could use, but not quite.
Yeah.
For some of the reasons that you pointed out.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is they don't, I think as far as differentiating them from what we're doing, they don't encode any of the input information. Like, they are, basically snapshots of like this various things that, are sort of Git like, in the history of a project, which is really good and useful for the purpose of archiving, but not necessarily solving the problems we care about for like software distribution. So from all of this, and feel free to read all this stuff, and I will make the update reflecting the clarification on Nix. Basically, I think the 3 things that came out of this for me were: OmniBOR doesn't require outside parties to do things. There's not a central taxonomy. There's not like a need for producers of packages to inherently do something different. I think part of the idea of like anyone can produce an identifier is the person who's making the artifact doesn't have to make the identifier for you. You, I think, get additional benefits the more that there is participation, because you can have manifests generated, but also like we can work to make it so the tools just do manifest generation itself, and the system doesn't inherently require anyone to like take a step. And then simple. So like the thing that struck me particularly with the Nix construction is just that it's fairly complicated. Like taking the fingerprint and then having the SHA-256 hash, but then also that it's truncated. So it's only the first 20 bytes of a 32-byte hash. It's just like a more complicated construction versus just what we have, which is sort of the Git construction. You have the little prefix and then you just hash the rest of the thing. I think it makes it easier for people to kind of wrap their heads around, and also like if someone wants to go implement it themselves. And I think this gets a little bit back to like the conformance testing thing, which we definitely should do, especially if we imagine encouraging people to implement stuff themselves. And then the other thing is, I know that this isn't updated in the spec yet, but it's the idea of like focusing more on SHA-256 rather than SHA-1 as like a more forward compatible thing. Frederick, yes.
Yeah, I believe for Nix itself, they're capturing very similar to what we had called out before, that they're operating as the build tool, capturing the inputs and capturing the outputs. And there is an opportunity to capture some of the dependencies as inputs, which helps with accelerating for caching. But it doesn't go into what's actually happening within the actual build itself. It's simply like the set of the content of the file hashed, normalized, and into a common format, and then it's similar to what we do, and then hashed over that, and then stored in a location with a well-known name. But one thing that is definitely missing as well is what is the actions that occurred within it, and like what is the process that something was built with? I think is something that they don't capture. But
Right. And that,
yeah. So I'll leave it out there for the moment.
yeah, so that'd be something like what you would capture with like salsa provenance attestations, right? It's just, it's like the description of the steps that were used to build the artifact.
Exactly, and so I think that there's that there if we're doing anything with salsa attestations that make it easy to consume that might be an interesting way to integrate to say like, hey, create an omnibor of this particular thing, and that thing ties in with a salsa attestation, and then this links you to these particular things, and that also helps solve some of the issues around like if they're truncating part of the hash, like that's okay because we'll still capture the attestation from the full hash anyway. So you still gain that provenance with minimal effort on their part. Just some thoughts, but I think it's like there's enough similarity between what they're doing and what we're doing that if we just come forward and say, hey, we have these omnivore things, like I've tried in the past, it didn't catch any interest because they're like, well, we're already doing something very similar to that. So I think
Right.
it's we'd have to come with something that shows them how they can integrate with a broader ecosystem.
Yeah, I think too, this is also part of the value I got with doing this comparative exercise. As I looked across these different identifier schemes, I do think like generally these different schemes have different purposes, and there are opportunities to sort of say like, hey, we're like more than one thing can exist together, and there's opportunities for these things to be complementary to each other because they do serve distinct purposes. Ava, yes.
I wanted to push the conversation forward and everything. This is all delightful detail and super useful, but I think you wanted to get to, and I see the last line here is website. And I want to make sure we have time to talk about that because
Okay.
Website.
Yes, so website. All of this gets to the screenshot thing that I shared, which this was just like a little quick, like just bare like HTML, CSS mockup thing that the design of it is not as important as just like kind of the information that's presented and kind of a first pass on marketing OmniBOR, basically. So this is basically, I'm sharing this as like if people have feedback or thoughts on this, a point that I made in the Slack is that this doesn't put use cases front and center. Although I do think if we went this approach, like that would need to be the very next thing down on the site. Some example use cases and encouraging people to come up with more potential applications. But yeah, so this is kind of a first draft.
I huge support here. As soon as I saw that in Slack this morning, going over messages, I fell in love, as it were.
Yeah. I'm also a big fan, and so as the person with the most who's the most likely to have some ego investment in the existing site, don't worry about that at all.
And yeah, the person with perhaps the second most ego invested in the current website. Good gosh, please take some paint to my old house. She needs a new coat. No, I think leading with the value proposition like this does, it's ready to use like all three of these are things that I often end up talking about, but I think leading on the website with them is good. In terms of following up with a demonstration of a use case, I think at least for one of our sort of top tier set of use cases, if we had a little short video or animated GIF of the cross-referencing of a kernel build, a kernel bug, and a CVE, which Bharati and team demonstrated that a year ago. We can do that with LLVM GCC, or the same thing with Rust. I think that makes a good visual sort of not audio bite, but little visual thing of like why this is so useful is, oh, look, I can connect these two things that are really hard to correlate today really easily.
Mm-hmm.
But no,
yeah, that does seem like a good kind of demonstration, and it's nice that it's basically just reflecting things that we've already done.
Exactly.
Yep.
Oh yeah, David, you have your hand up.
I agree with everything that Ava and Ed have said. I would add one thing to artifact identifiers that scale, which is the business benefit. So you can track your software provenance, or so you can know what's running on your systems, or some other thing, because folks who are outside of our kind of sphere, being able to point a business person to this to say, why do I care? I think that becomes important. The other thing is the decentralization assertion, which is if we're going to have a queryable corpus, how does that deal with or how do we deal with that and decentralization at the same time? And that's a topic for another day, and I actually have to drop to prep for another call. But maybe we put it on the agenda to start talking about how we can have more than one, kind of corpus that feels like one, that operates like one.
David, I think that's a tooling challenge and an opportunity for businesses to benefit from. Totally good conversation as well. On your first point, I know you've got to go, so I'll try and be compact. The heading artifact identifiers that scale, maybe there's a way to reframe that to catch the attention of all the other companies that are currently trying to solve the same problem. They're all working around the SBOM space, grappling with widely varying software name, vendor and version string, right? That's the NTIA tuple. That has, I do believe it is public knowledge that NTIA is looking at revising that minimum elements currently and having discussions around that. I think they're over in the some of the SBOM working groups. So it might also be really good to bring this either after the website's redone or at some point over to the SBOM working groups and say, hey, here's an approach that businesses can use as well. Maybe something that Andrew, David, the two of you would want to do.
Yeah. Awesome. So I think recognizing when we're close on time here, next thing that I could do with this, I think, would be because this was just like a single sort of page little experiment thing, try to actually take some version of this and work it into a branch on the current site as a place for people to start giving feedback. And I mean, I could go with something like this design, but like I said, this was very quickly tossed together.
This is a fine place to start. Ping me if you start the site source going, where the hell? Because it doesn't matter like how well you do your Go, there's a certain amount of that. So
awesome. Yeah, so I think I would probably start with that then and just get something in a branch and on the site repo. And probably like what I've done with the input manifest thing, like have it as a draft PR, and then, if people have feedback, we can sort of play around with it. And but that becomes at least a focal point for kind of hammering out something real.
Yep. Sounds good.
Awesome.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, and then Frederick, I see you still have your hand up. Was that something new, or is that just from before?
That was old. Turns out I don't get tired, keep my hand up here, so I'll drop it.
All right. Here, okay, let me exit this. This is where I see if it'll actually let me. Okay, cool. All right, and then back to meeting notes. Yeah, I think that does it. We got about 3 minutes left. So unless anyone has anything else, we can call it here.
Sounds good. Thanks for all the great discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks everyone for the feedback. And seriously, if you have any more feedback on the site, I'll share when I've got the draft PR up, and definitely appreciate more feedback and input as this moves forward.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Ed, I hope you feel better.
Me too. It's not fun.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Alrighty, later.